welcome everybody to the panel. Thank you for joining us today. I think it's going to be an exciting panel. This is an exciting time for hydrogen. I would dare to say even a pivotal time for hydrogen. We've maybe been saying that for a long time now, but I think we actually mean it this time, and that makes it especially exciting. In California, as well as Japan, a couple places in Europe, and other places around the world, there is really development going on right now today. As you can see on the slide, we have 31 stations operating in California, retail stations selling hydrogen for vehicles. We have another 33 or so in various processes of development. We're working to get to 100, and our governor on Friday just announced we're actually going to go to 200 and committed a lot more money to help us get there. So on the transportation side, the stations are coming in California, and we are committed to giving this market the opportunity to grow as we think and hope that it will. Additionally, there's a lot going on outside of the transportation space, and I will let our panel opine on this, but it's my opinion that to really move this forward, it can't just be a transportation conversation, or it can't just be a hydrogen station conversation, and how do we get from 31 to 64 to 100 to 200, but how do we incorporate hydrogen and renewable hydrogen into our economy much more broadly? And I think the development of stations, I think things like 2-cent, 3-cent kilowatt hour renewable electricity contracts, which are becoming much more common and exciting, really enables hydrogen to be a much more eminent part of the conversation, and the vision that hydrogen and renewable hydrogen is always posed to really be right now. So this is a very exciting, again, time for hydrogen, a great panel to be discussing this. There's a lot of investment going into this market from car companies, gas suppliers, oil companies, a lot of consortiums around putting billions of dollars into beginning markets in California and Europe and Japan and elsewhere. And we have a great panel to really pull this all together for us. I'll provide quick introductions now. We have a fairly short panel here. You have access to their bios online if you want more information. And I'll just go through and introduce the panel and then let them take over. First, we have Hiroshi Katayama, who is Deputy Director at the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy in Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. He is responsible for energy policy focusing on new technologies, including hydrogen and fuel cells, and he recently led the development of a national hydrogen strategy in Japan, which he'll discuss for us shortly. Next, we have Jackie Birdsall, who is a senior engineer in the fuel cell and hybrid vehicle group at Toyota, and is one of their leaders on the Mirai. She's worked on fuel cells for over 12 years, and with Toyota in both Japan and the US. She's going to talk about Toyota's commitment to decarbonizing the transportation sector, including their leading efforts on fuel cells in both the light-duty and heavy-duty vehicle sectors. Then we'll have George Minter, who will share Southern California Gas's leading vision for decarbonizing the natural gas pipeline. As the Regional Vice President for External Affairs and Environmental Strategy at the gas company, he is responsible for the company's public affairs, community relations, public policy, and energy and environmental affairs. And then finally, we have Dr. Sunita Sadayapal, who I'm hoping can pull this all together for us. She has a broad perspective as the Director of Fuel Cell Technologies at the Department of Energy, where she has been a leader in their hydrogen programs for the last 15 years. She will describe the department's efforts and perspective on the future prospects of hydrogen and fuel cells to enable energy security and resiliency across the transportation and energy sectors. So with that, I will turn it over to Hiroshi.
Yep. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Japan's energy and hydrogen energy policy and strategy. I'm Hiroshi Katayama, Deputy Director of METI. One of our missions is to realize well-balanced energy systems and structure in terms of energy security, environment, and economic affordability. These three factors are sometimes called energy trilemma. That means it's hard to satisfy all of these three at the same time. Japan is very poor in resources such as oil and natural gas. As you can see in the figure, more than 90% of our primary energy depends on overseas fossil fuels. So we have taken a variety of measures so far to overcome the energy trilemma. For instance, Japan improved its energy efficiency by 35% after the oil crisis in the 1970s. Now its energy efficiency is world top level, meaning that it's not easy to improve more. Renewable energy is rapidly expanding in Japan under the feed-in tariff scheme after 2011. However, regardless of our huge investment, the share of renewables still remains at 15% of generation mix. Nuclear energy was thought to be a promising energy in Japan, but the situation has changed after the Fukushima nuclear power plant accidents. Now, a few nuclear power plants are operating. Also, there's an issue of final disposal site for the high-level radioactive waste. Carbon dioxide capture and storage, CCS, could be an alternative. Also, Japan has been studying CCS for a long time. A prospective storage site has not been found so far. Finally, here comes hydrogen. So, why hydrogen? Basically, there are two reasons. Firstly, hydrogen is clean, not only when using it, but also in total, by using CCS or renewable energy. Secondly, hydrogen can improve energy security as it can be produced from a variety of energy resources of many places on the Earth. The problem is the cost. How to supply low-cost hydrogen is the key to the hydrogen-based society. Recently, the government of Japan formulated the basic hydrogen strategy. As far as I know, it's the world's first national strategy. The Prime Minister Abe said that through innovation, hydrogen energy will become a trump card to solve the issues of energy security and global warming. The basic strategy serves as a guidepost for Japan to lead the way towards decarbonization in the world by providing hydrogen as a new energy option. Based on the strategy, we aim for supplying affordable cost of hydrogen. The next slide illustrates a rough scenario. To supply low-cost hydrogen, it is necessary to change the current supply chain that relies on domestic hydrogen produced from improved fuel. The main approach is to build international supply chains. On the other hand, power-to-gas that is producing hydrogen from renewables can be getting feasible along with renewable energy expansion. Regarding the demand side, H2 mobility has already started. The number of hydrogen refueling stations in Japan will reach to 100 by the end of this March. In order to break the chicken and egg problem of H2 supply and demand, hydrogen power generation would be the key as an application using massive amount of hydrogen. By 2030, we aim for its commercialization. Finally, let me introduce some ongoing projects. Two international supply chain projects are in progress. One is between Australia, producing hydrogen from brown coal, while storing CO2 by CCS. Another is between Brunei, using unutilized off-gas. Both projects are going to be in operation in 2020. A power-to-gas demonstration project is also ongoing in Fukushima. Renewable hydrogen is planned to be transported and used in Tokyo in 2020. For instance, that renewable hydrogen can be used for Olympic flame. When looking at the demand side, hydrogen power generation technologies are being developed. This month, 1 megawatt class cogeneration system using hydrogen started to operate in Kobe. Towards 2020, H2 mobility infrastructure is planned to expand more under the new joint venture to be established in this spring. I'm very happy if you can visit Tokyo in 2020, not only for Olympic Games, but also for checking out the progress of our demonstration project. Thanks.
Oh, is it still morning? Barely. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm lucky to be following that presentation because it saves me the time of having to explain why it is Toyota is pursuing hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles. But we have been doing so for over 20 years that we've been invested in this. And in 2015, we launched our first production vehicle, the Toyota Mirai, which for those who aren't familiar with it, and I hope most of you are, it's a sedan that refills in 3 to 5 minutes and it goes 300 miles of all-electric range. This is critical for us because it's part of our portfolio of zero-emission solutions that we want to offer to the customer, and it's the only one that can currently fully replace a conventional gasoline vehicle. But some of the other advantages of fuel cells is the scalability. So a fuel cell can be small enough to power a smartphone or large enough to power a building. And one way that we're currently demonstrating that is by taking 2 of the Mirai systems and putting them into a Class 8 semi-truck in what we call Project Portal. And the purpose of this Project Portal is to demonstrate that we can move goods from the Port of Long Beach up to the rail yards, which is up and down the 710 freeway here in Los Angeles, using a fuel cell all-electric vehicle. What this does is it reduces the particulate matter, it cuts back on the noise pollution, and then it changes the flow of traffic. So I don't have any slides for you, but I wanted to show this video to you just so you guys, as you watch this, think about the potential of what this type of technology can do. If it plays. So you have the conventional on the top and the fuel cell trailer on the bottom. Think about the traffic flow. This is silent operation. And just like that, the fuel cell truck's out of frame. Diesel's trying to catch up. Now this was shot in Arizona, but this vehicle is currently operating at the Port of Long Beach, and we're gathering real-world data as we're running it up and down that 710 freeway. But it's just the beginning. As we get this data, we're going to continue to build more of these trucks with a vision of eventually replacing all of those diesel engines with fuel cell engines, which means, again, silent, emission-free operation. In California alone, we've already sold 3,000 Toyota Mirai, which means there are 3,000 less gasoline vehicles on the road. And we're going to continue on from there. In 2020, at the Port of Long Beach, we'll be installing and operating a 2.35 megawatt Tri-gen fuel cell system with some of our partners. And the purpose of that will be to take the agricultural waste, which if you were on the last, if you're listening to the last panel, you heard that there's a lot of opportunities in California for ag waste that we can capture as biogas, put it into a high temperature fuel cell, create power, water, and hydrogen. And that hydrogen will come out as 1.2 tons of fully renewable hydrogen a day that we can use to fill our Class 8 semi-trucks or our customer Mirai vehicles. So that's just part of the future. And again, Toyota is not working in a vacuum. We have to work with all different kinds of partners, some of who are on this panel, many of whom I see in this room. And it's going to be a collaborative effort that we think, as we continue to demonstrate success in the sustainability and in the scalability of hydrogen, that this will become a key component of decarbonization of the transportation sector. I'll be happy to take questions later.
The reason we're coming to the podium is so Ryan has a seat at the table. Okay. Yeah, you can put it up there. I thought I'd do a visual for the end of my talk. But to start, I just want to say that it's pretty cool to look out here and see a pretty full room. And we're not science geeks. We're like regular people that are involved in different aspects of energy and environmental policy or businesses. So we've come a long way, because 8 years ago when this started, it was a geeky subject, and now it's a mainstream subject. And we have Honda, and we have Hyundai, and we have Toyota, coming forward with products. And we have fuel cell manufacturers that are deploying residential fuel cells in Japan. 100,000 were deployed to provide for household energy needs in the wake of the nuclear accident from the earthquake and monsoon. So it isn't just transportation, it's industrial, commercial, and residential uses as well. Fuel cells run on hydrogen, that's what's in the vehicles. That's the little box that can power your home, power your business. Actually, Southern California Gas was the first big promoter of fuel cell technology here in California, and I think in the country. We actually sited a dozen fuel cells in the mid-90s throughout our service territory. In fact, the South Coast AQMD, when they relocated to their new facility, put a fuel cell in and provided some of the power and heat requirements. Natural gas sees hydrogen as renewable gas, as part of our future. Natural gas is methane. What is methane? Well, people in the early days of teaching me about this told me that methane is God's way of managing hydrogen. That's all methane is. It's one little carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, CH4. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. It easily converts from electricity through water to be hydrogen. And you can manage hydrogen as an energy form. You can methanate it, meaning you can add that carbon atom, and you have methane, renewable methane. We're seeing in the EU nations hydrogen being utilized broadly as an automotive fuel for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, but we're also seeing it blended into the natural gas delivery system. In an earlier panel, I mentioned that I had just gotten off the phone this morning from a discussion with Engie, which is Gaz de France and the electric provider. The newly named Combo utility has announced 100% renewable energy future, renewable electricity and renewable gas. And they're now blending 12% and 6% hydrogen into their gas stream. We see hydrogen sort of as the future renewable gas, but hydrogen comes from a lot of places. Today, hydrogen in the marketplace comes from the gas industry. The Air Liquide and Praxair and Air Products, they are big customers of the gas company, and they run a steam methane reformation facility and take our methane and turn it into hydrogen and put the CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's really not zero emission, and that's really, from a climate change perspective, the way we want to go. But it's the way we're going now. Now we're required, I think, to have 33% of our stations be renewable gas. And so we're starting to see the progress on the hydrogen side to push towards renewable gas, renewable hydrogen. What are the ways that we provide renewable hydrogen? Well, biomethane turns out to be one way. And in the EU nations, and just now starting here in California, we're seeing projects that provide hydrogen supply from biomethane development. We're seeing that throughout Europe, and we'll start seeing more of that in the US. But we saw in the earlier slide deck the power to gas vision, and we see that as part of our vision. What is SoCalGas? We don't produce gas, we don't make gas. We're a pipeline company. We deliver energy to the end users. 90% of the people today take service from us for heat and power and for cooking. We've got folks that have huge combined heat and power operations, like refineries. So they're producing their own electricity and their own process heat for their refining operations. And we have folks, that use it for water heat or space heat or cooking for the dryer. We have a pipeline system that delivers energy. And today it's mostly natural gas, fossil gas. But tomorrow it's going to be renewable gas, and it's going to be biomethane, and it's going to be hydrogen blending, and it's going to be methanated hydrogen. Well, where does all this come from? I think that's the future that we need to move towards, and the way we get there is to imagine what needs to come about to get to that future. Engie said they decided they're going to be 100% renewable because that's what we need to be, and now they're backing up saying, now how do we get there? So one of the ways they get there is biomethane. Develop our waste resources into renewable gas, both as processed biomethane going into the pipeline, but also as a hydrogen feedstock. And so that's, agricultural, that's dairy, that's wastewater, that's landfills, that's woodland waste through gasification, provides a tremendous supply of renewable gas, either biomethane or hydrogen. But power to gas becomes something that we've got to develop, and we're starting to see the opportunity to develop that in the EU nations, and we're starting to see the preconditions here in California, and that is an excess supply of both solar and wind. We're producing too much solar in the middle of the day. It exceeds our demand. What are we going to do with that supply? We direct it through water, through electrolysis. We produce hydrogen, and we send it over to the folks using hydrogen, like the stations that are refueling the Toyota vehicles. What do we do with that excess wind at night? Everybody's asleep. We produce hydrogen. And so, as Anji said earlier today, we see electricity and gas as just an integrated energy resource. Electricity is gas, and gas is electricity, if you're thinking about it as hydrogen. And that we move power to gas when we have a whole lot of power and not enough demand. And we use that gas and we store it because it's a molecular physical commodity that you can store for a long period of time in massive volumes. And we deploy it as heat or as power when needed. And so their vision of a hydrogen energy economy is an electric grid, a gas pipeline grid, and vehicles running on electricity and fuel cells and hydrogen, and that the future is renewable gas and renewable electricity. And that's the vision we have, and I think that what we're hearing today, and I hope we'll hear from DOE, is a vision that's consistent, that moves us to that future, because I think that is the future we need to move to. Everybody in California is so focused on 100% renewable, but they're only talking about electricity. Anji said, if you don't do gas, you can't get there. So we got to think about electricity and gas, and we've got to grow our renewable profile in both electricity and gas, and hydrogen is a key part of that equation. Did that video, that picture ever? Okay, thank you. I had a great picture I had a picture from Anji that had the gas utility of the future, and it was just pretty cool, but I just got it today, so I thought I'd send it over there, but maybe we'll get it later. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So first I wanted to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very familiar with hydrogen and fuel cells, how many of you would say that you're a 6 or higher, if you can raise your hands? Okay, so a few, maybe 10% are experts, but I think even for the experts, I think what you'll see today might surprise you. So I'm going to give you just 4 main messages this morning before we go into the discussion. And the first is really unprecedented growth in the fuel cell industry. So every year we publish the DOE annual report, and we're still getting the 2017 numbers, but if you look at the 2016 numbers, 500 megawatts of fuel cell power shipped worldwide, that's half a gigawatt. Over 60,000 commercial fuel cells shipped worldwide, 1.6 billion in revenues. So we're starting to see a commercially viable market develop. And in addition to vehicles, you can see most of that growth was the transportation sector. And we have now about 3,500 fuel cell vehicles, mostly in California. These are commercial, sold, or leased. Congratulations, Jackie and others. But we're also starting to see other markets and applications emerging. So I wanted to show the example of forklifts and backup power. So we cost shared some of the early deployments, and now we're tracking thousands, over 16,000 fuel cell forklifts, for instance, that are going in without DOE funding. And major customers, so Walmart, FedEx, Coca-Cola, using hydrogen fuel cells inside warehouses, zero emissions, quiet. And very recently, there was an announcement by one of the major suppliers that they reached their 10 millionth hydrogen fueling with their customers. And they said every 5.6 seconds, one of their customers is fueling with hydrogen. So I think a major takeaway is significant experience in real-world operation. I just returned from China, and they had placed and orders for like 3,000 hydrogen fuel cell buses. So I think that's the main number one message. The second point I wanted to cover, and we get this question a lot at DOE, so I wanted to show this slide, and we have all this information on our website. And it's not sufficient to just talk about zero emissions from the tailpipe or zero pollution from the tailpipe. And hydrogen is part of a broad portfolio, but and we don't push technology or advocate any specific technology. It still takes energy to produce, deliver, and store the hydrogen. And so we look at a number of different technologies. This just gives you an example. If you include the total life cycle emissions, we also look at petroleum use. And now that we have commercial fuel cell cars on the road, you can see at the bottom the Mirai. Even if you use natural gas to produce hydrogen, we get this question a lot, you still cut the total life cycle emissions in half compared to today's gasoline vehicle of about 450 grams per mile. And then, of course, in California, with the 33% renewable requirement, you can see the very bottom, even more total emissions reduction. So again, wanted to talk about that. And then in addition to transportation, I thought I'd highlight other examples. So again, fuel cells apply across the board. This just gives you a snapshot of the US, over 40 states using stationary fuel cells, well over 200 megawatts. And we have a lot of examples with backup power. So we talked about critical loads, cell phone towers. And this really brings me to the third point, which is hydrogen and fuel cells in a much larger context of what we call the H2 at scale energy system. And so again, this is part of a portfolio, and here what I'm showing is on the left is diverse domestic resources, so renewables, as well as base load, so nuclear, fossil fuels, natural gas, and the value, so really hydrogen as an enabler. So the value of hydrogen really lies in the fact that it can provide benefits across sectors. So in a way, this is a paradigm shift. It's not just thinking about the transportation sector alone, but as you can see, you can couple and decouple from the grid in unique ways, not just the grid electrons to electrons in the case of battery storage. So you can inject into the natural gas pipeline. You can even react with CO2 to produce liquid fuels. The industrial applications need hydrogen. So again, the value proposition of hydrogen across sectors, and of course you can also bypass the grid. So it's really diversification, integration, maximizing asset utilization, all of those advantages in terms of hydrogen at scale, that concept. So what we've done at DOE, through our national labs, we've done a nationwide resource assessment. This is all in progress. In this one example, shows solar and wind, for instance, as well as nuclear, resource availability to produce hydrogen, and then also projects the potential demand for hydrogen in various regions. And so the red, again, this is just one example, a snapshot, looks at where potentially demand could exceed supply based on the regional availability of the resources. So we're going to do more of a deep dive regionally on resource availability for hydrogen, obviously water as well, and we have a roadmap that's underway for the H2 at scale concept. And so I think the last couple of things I'll mention is really we need a value proposition. So in addition to the resource availability, we're looking at combining multiple revenue streams to reduce the cost of hydrogen. And again, this gives you an example, base load operation, let's say renewables plus an electrolyzer, and how we can provide grid services. So again, not just thinking about the transportation sector, but how can we enable multiple sectors and a value proposition to reduce cost. So future announcements, we have a number of workshops with H2 at scale. Our focus, DOE, is really early stage R&D to achieve the targets, so we have a competitive solution, and then leveraging the private sector, industry, great partners with the state to complement our work. And then we also have formal requests for information that will be posted soon I really look across the offices, relevant offices at DOE, so solar and wind and so forth, looking at where are there regions where you'll have curtailment or projected curtailment, and then where would there be opportunities to produce hydrogen and increase utilization, really this cluster strategy to increase demand for that hydrogen and offer, again, a value proposition. And then also looking at where are there regulatory barriers, for example, that could be addressed to help, again, enable and move the needle. So standardized permitting and so forth. And then we have portal, a one-stop shop called h2tools.org, which provides information safety resources that have already been translated, for instance, in Japanese, parts of it have. And then we have a save the date, June 13th in Washington, D.C. If you're interested, we're going to have for the first time a national hydrogen and fuel cell event. All of our projects across the DOE offices as well as other agencies. So we'll have DOD, we'll have NASA, DOT, and then an industry expo as well, all of our solid oxide as well, so save the date. And finally, I wanted to emphasize the importance of education and outreach, so it was interesting to hear it's not batteries or fuel cells, it's batteries and fuel cells and advanced combustion biofuels. It's really an all of the above portfolio. And for some of you who may not know, hydrogen is the element number one. The atomic weight is 1.008, and so Congress designated October 8th as National Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Day, for those who may not be aware. So mark your calendars, there are going to be quite a few events, and then we also launched an Increase Your H2IQ effort. So a lot of these slides are available on our website as PowerPoint. You can download them. There's information to really communicate the message. And so I've always told this joke, when I first moved from industry to government, people thought I was moving to NIH, and I was always perplexed, and it turns out they thought fuel cells were the same as stem cells. And so, so in terms of education and outreach, I think we still have a long way to go. So thank you.
Oh, okay. Good. I was not aware of Hydrogen Day on October 8th. I was aware of Mole Day. Anybody have Mole Day in their bag? October 23rd, because there's 10 to the 23 atoms in a mole. So there are now 2 atomic days in October, I guess we can celebrate. Not often I get to refer to Mole Day. We do have your image here, George. Who I just put this.
If it doesn't fit, then you can remove this.
Should I let you do this?
Probably, yes.
That's fine.
All right. Let's see.
In the meantime, maybe I can ask a question for our panels, because we are running low on time here. We heard a lot about different markets, different opportunities, growth in the stationary market, growth in the transportation market, opportunity in the power to gas sector. Do you guys have a sense of, are any of these more important or more immediate term opportunities for supporting growth in the hydrogen sector more broadly? Are there any key issues or key market segments that we really need to focus on in the next year or two to usher things forward most quickly?
Well, I'll volunteer. I think transportation's where it's at. I think that's where the most momentum is. I think that the auto manufacturers have been driving that, and that's because, you know, you have a little power plant that drives your electric motor right on board. There's a logic and a sense to that. I think the fuel cell market, more broadly in stationary applications, is an important sector. Today's fuel cells can run on natural gas, but the carbon's oxidized, and so you do have CO2 coefficient. So you want that gas to be renewable gas or hydrogen. But I did mention that Japan had deployed 100,000 residential-sized fuel cells. They're very expensive. There are fuel cell businesses that are growing businesses here in California, Bloom, Fuel Cell Energy, which is a partner, I think, on the Trigen project. So we think that fuel cells are going to grow in market share. What we're seeing is that the institutional or sort of corporate campus environment, as well as a lot of the high-tech power needs, are coming now, and increasingly in the future will come from fuel cell arrays. And what we're experiencing is demands by the fuel cell companies, particularly Bloom and Fuel Cell Energy, is to deliver renewable gas. Because when they go pitch Google for the next Google campus or Apple, they want fuel cells. That's what they want. They want to have their own power supply. They don't want fossil gas. They want renewable gas and hydrogen and renewable hydrogen. So I think today it's transportation and the automakers are driving it. I think tomorrow the fuel cell manufacturers will drive it into stationary markets to displace traditional energy end-use applications.
Maybe I can add to that as well. So I think what we're noticing is, in addition to the traditional focus on the light-duty vehicles, more interest in the heavy-duty. And we have a couple of projects, for instance, at DOE, with one with UPS and one with FedEx, looking at hydrogen fuel cells as essentially as range extenders to double the range of their battery electric vehicles. And again, with the fast charging, the fast fueling time, we heard about the truck project. We're hearing about the buses, for instance, especially overseas, and the challenges, especially with the transit agencies, where they see, plugging in hundreds of extension cords overnight for their bus fleet. So I think some of those larger scale applications, I mentioned the forklifts and backup power, so it's really sort of a strategic, how do we get economies of scale and look at a number of applications. But I think the main one I would add to that is the concept of large capacity energy storage. And so there are roughly 30 projects, at least worldwide, looking at electrolyzers, looking at using renewables to produce that hydrogen and store it, and then use it for multiple applications or inject it into the grid. So again, it's really the main message is not just stovepiping the transportation sector, the stationary sector, or other applications, but really looking at the synergy and really a different perspective of how you can enable multiple applications in multiple sectors.
Yeah, and just if anyone's not, maybe we're going to hit on the same topic. Do you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that energy storage. She talked about electrolysis, thinking about energy storage, not just deployment in end-use applications. So power to gas is really what we're talking about. It's deploying excess renewable electricity through water, producing the hydrogen. So SoCalGas with UC Irvine and in collaboration with DOE funding just built the first power to gas facility in the United States. There's about 30 throughout the EU nations that are operating, going from demonstration now to commercial projects. This is initial R&D for us, but we're producing hydrogen from the excess midday solar off the rooftop of the campus's array of solar that covers all of their parking lots, and in the midday, they're producing way too much electricity than they can consume, and so the excess goes through the electrolyzer, produces hydrogen, and on a real-time basis is injected into the pipeline system. And so we're learning a lot about how to do electrolysis and how to manage deployment, and really it's a switch. It's when they have a microgrid for the campus, and when the grid can't take electricity, it just directs it to the electrolyzer. We produce the hydrogen gas, puts it into the pipeline, and now we're doing another study on, okay, how does it affect the pipeline? But the interesting fact on storage is the data that we've developed in terms of storage capacity validates a lot of the science that we've been reading, which is that we can essentially store massive volumes of electricity, not for hours, but for days, months, and years when you redeploy your excess electricity through power to gas into gaseous storage. And so there's a tremendous opportunity there that's really important for California policymakers to understand.
We are officially into lunch, but I'd like to take any, if there's a burning question in the audience, anybody? Should we let you go eat then? All right, well, thank the panel. Thank you guys, and enjoy the day.